Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm going to do it again. Okay, everybody, welcome to our beginning again retreat. And Raquel is going to join us to share the Chronicles of Grief. Okay, Raquel, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Miss Denise. I appreciate you so much. I'm so honored to be here and so honored to share a bit about my grief story and how I am overcoming because it is active. It's not, I've overcome, period. I'm always overcoming that. So I think for me, and again, talked about that I didn't really want to do a PowerPoint. I thought about it and I was like, I want to have some highlights of things I want to talk about, but I want to speak from my heart, essentially. So when I think about the word chronicle, I think about it being a journey. And so because grief is a journey that transforms over time. And so when I think about where I started in my grief journey and where I am now, it's definitely been that, a journey. And so I start by talking about, 2020 was such a hard year for most of us, if not all of us, and lots of changes. And I think when I talk about grief and loss with folks, we are a lot of times talking about death specifically, but grief and loss is not synonymous with death. It can be connected to anything, a life that we thought we were going to live, the life we thought we had, the life that we had before, relationship, pet, anything that creates that sense of loss. So I think in 2020, all of us were really experiencing a very heavy loss of the life that we thought that we had. And so for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people who had to experience the loss of just life as we knew it, there was also this other layer of loss. And so I was, unfortunately, had to experience the loss of two of the most important people in my life. So I start by talking about my grandmother, Eulalie Miles, who lived to be 100 years old. So thankful for that. However, she was 100. She had just celebrated her birthday, February 2020, turned 100, and then she passed April of 2020. And that really rocked me, essentially, because she was it for me. She was my lifeline. She was if you hear people, talk about Raquel and her grandma, oh, that's it. Like, that's her heartbeat, essentially. And I didn't ever think that I was ready for her to no longer be here in physical. And so it was really, really tough. It was really hard. But even before my grandmother passed, my mother passed in January 2020. So this was right at the beginning of COVID. Weren't really sure what was going on around that time. And so such different experiences of grief for me because quick background, I was raised by my grandparents. Both of my parents struggled with addiction. And so my mother was largely absent from my upbringing, and my grandmother and grandfather were it. They were it for me. My father was kind of in and out. And so they were my anchor. They were literally what kept me here, essentially. And so, thinking about my birth story, I was a premature baby. I was a pound and 8 ounces, hearing my grandmother talk about it, how she remembered, going to the hospital to see me in the NICU and saying that I was just so little and, all of those things. She really set a standard for love for me because it really was unconditional. It really was she and my grandfather put their lives on hold to be able to step in and fill that gap that I needed in those moments. And so grateful that they did that. However, having two parents who were struggling with addiction, that is also a loss, right? So if we talk about grief and loss, specific to loved ones who have passed on, those significant losses also bring up other losses. And so, going through life and having that parental loss on both sides, mom and dad, it was really hard. But my grandparents were my rock. They were it. And then my grandfather passed when I was 7. And so then it was just myself and my grandmother. She was my best friend. She was my right hand. She was all of it. And throughout that, I was really struggling with a lot of that anger from having that loss of my parents who were still alive, right? I think that's an important piece to think about because it complicates the grief process. Grieving people who are still alive is another layer, another level. Grieving what you thought you wanted it to be, what you felt like you deserved it to be when it comes to parenting. It can be really, really hard. My grandmother did her best to fill in the gaps. I was raised by gap fillers. And so that's something that I also take with me when I think about the legacy that she left. And so kind of fast forwarding, my grandma was it. There was a point in time where I could not even think about my grandmother being like no longer here. I would go into a full panic attack. Like my heart would race. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My throat was closed. Like it was really bad. And she was still here. And so I remember my therapist saying, the more you think about her death while she's still here, the less you'll be able to enjoy her while she's still here. And so I really I was very intentional about being able to focus on her life as she was here. And so fast forward, I was able to go to therapy and work through my anger with my mom and like what that looked like. And the thing about my mom was that she was such a person that owned her stuff. She owned it. She talked about her recovery. She talked about being an addiction. She talked about, the things that led her to those things. Any question that I had, anything I wanted to know about, she would say, "Daughter, if I remember, I'll tell you." So it was also like she was so funny and so like honest, which I think for me in grieving her as the mom I thought I needed or that I felt like I deserved, and then also carving out this new lane of mother and daughter. So in the 5 years before she passed, she was my BFF. Like we talked every day. I was able to carve out, she was really able to carve out a different lane for herself through her honesty, through her transparency, through her, I made a mistake. I know what I did. I know I was didn't do right by y'all. I'm a lot of, have siblings. We were not raised together because of that. And so, just her being very, very honest, which I think was so important to us being able to even get to a place where we were super close. And so, you know, grieving her while she was still alive was really difficult. And then being able to reconnect with her, and in a different space, right? I was an adult, she was an adult. She had been in recovery for several years. I was working through my stuff and healing and all those things. And then she was diagnosed with cancer. And so in that year and a half, 2 years that she was battling cancer, it was really, really hard for me. It complicated that sort of pre-existing grief and loss that I'd already felt by her, and now to know that she might die. And so January 10th, 2020, she did pass away from cancer. And I remember the week before she passed, I just had this nudge. I just had this like I was coming from work and she was living in Louisville, Kentucky at the time, which is like an hour and a half for me. I'm in Cincinnati. And I was coming, it was like 6 p.m. and I'm coming from work and I'm like, I just need to go see her. Like I had been seeing her, I had been connecting with her, and I was like, they were talking about hospice and all those things. And I was just like, I remember driving and I was like, okay, I can either go right and go home or go left and go to Kentucky. And I was like, I just felt like my car was moving. I was like, I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna go. So I made it there in an hour. I was flying to Louisville. And I was able to have a conversation with my mom, like a real deep, I love you, I forgive you. I'm so honored that you were my mom, that we were able to connect in the way that we did. And I was like, I turned out great. And I'm making a joke. And she was like, you did, daughter. Like she was on lots of meds, heavily sedated. She perked up and said, you did, daughter, you did. You did turn out great. And I told her that, she carried a lot of guilt about not being with us and not raising us. And so that last conversation, I said, I forgive you because it also takes a mom to know that you can't. Right. And so that was an act of mothering for you. And she just looked at me and was like, okay, daughter. Like, like, okay. And so I'm so honored and grateful I was able to have that final conversation with her. She passed a few days after that. And so I think for me, just the initial shock after her passing was really hard because I felt like I had just got her. I felt like we had built this very, very tight bond, and we were able to connect, and I could call her anytime and she could it just all the things I didn't think that I needed from her, she was able to provide, which was really, really just beautiful. And I felt like I was robbed. I definitely felt like I'm like, I just got her. Why would why would she have to go like that? And then 3 months later, when my grandmother passed, it felt so different because I had my grandma for, all the years of my life. And so in grief, when I think about my grandmother versus my mom, with my mom, it very much feels like unfair. It feels like I just got her and you just gonna snatch her from me. Like that is like I grieve the things we didn't get to do. For my grandmother, I grieve all the things that we did. the who she was in my life. And I know myself and Denise talked about this in a virtual chat, but feeling like an anchor on a chain, you just cut the chain and you just kind of floating along. Like that's how I feel like I've been feeling the past 4 years. And so there was definitely a lot of shock, disbelief, numbness for sure. My mother's affairs were not in order. And so I think that prolonged for me the grief process because we had to jump into logic. Okay, we got to get this done. We got to get this done. So grief was kind of on the back burner. But my grandmother, her funeral had been paid for, planned for 20 years. It was just like, we have to confirm some things. And they were just like, well, that's it. And then we just sat there. And so there was space for all of that. I didn't have anything to distract me from the process. And so just so much was just happening. And then I think about coping, what I did to cope during those first 6 to 8 months. Not a lot of healthy things, not going to lie. A lot of detachment, a lot of autopilot, a lot of unhealthy coping with food, gained a lot of grief weight. Definitely was coping with alcohol. Like, we were buying out. I'm like, didn't we just have this? Like, just, and not even noticing, like, just on the back end being like, oh, is that how I've been coping? Avoidance for sure. Like, but even in the avoidance, internally I was avoiding, but outwardly people were like, "How are you doing?" Terrible. My mom died. Then my grandma died. How are you? Terrible. My mama's plural died. Like I was very honest with folks about how I felt because I didn't have the energy to lie. I didn't have the energy to say everything's fine. I'm doing my best. I just had to be like, terrible. They're dead. And so even just being honest with my feelings was a very different process for me in grief. And so my husband asked me probably in those first 6 to 8 months, like he saw where it was going. He saw the unhealthy coping. He saw the detachment. He saw the autopilot. He saw the avoidance. He saw the anger. I was angry that the world was moving on. And I'm sad. And everyone else is just moving right on along. Y'all don't know my mama's dad? Like, I'm just like, I was mad that people were moving on and I wasn't. I was stuck. And my husband asked me, and he's so amazing. He was like, so what do you think? Do you think you'll ever be happy, or what it will take for you to be happy? And I said, if they come back, like simple, like straight out the gate, like that was my immediate answer, visceral, like they gotta be alive. Then I'll be happy. I'll be fine. And I think for him, it was very much like, oh, can you see your counselor more than once a week? Or I'm like, I can. And for me, it was like saying it out loud was, oh, that's kind of heavy. Maybe I'm not doing as well as I think I am, right? Because I wasn't. I was doing terribly. I was very much stuck. And so I think, again, for my grandmother, it was so much about what we had done and the part she played in my life was she was it for me. I called her my heartbeat. I would tell people, I would joke with people. I said, when you die, come check on me. Make sure I'm eating, taking a shower, make sure I'm not curled up in a ball. Like I just could see that it was just gonna be, just put me in there with her. Like that was the thought I had. Just this is my life will be over if she is not present with me because she had been so integral in every piece of my life. And so I think for me, again, my mother's struggles complicated the grief process for me because I was grieving two things. I was grieving who I wanted her to be when I was growing up, and I was also grieving who she became as we became adults and we were able to get to that place. And so that was really hard, really, really, really difficult. And so it very much complicated for me the process of grief. And so if I think about again, title Chronicles of Grief, talking about it being a journey, if I think about the journey, lots of ups and downs, I can't stress enough to folks who are grieving that it is up and down and it will be that forever, right? Like grief is infinite. And I know that there may be pressure from family or friends to be like, dang, you're still, they're worried about you. They're saying, you'll get over it or all of those types of things. And I think for me, I tell folks all the time, the hardest part for me was integrating grief into my day to day because there's no way to not feel it. You could wake up in the morning and feel like you're doing okay. And by the end of the day, something happens, you see something, you smell something, you hear something, and then it's like you're back in the bed. Or you wake up in the bed like, I don't want to do this today. And by the end of the day, you might feel better, right? And so I know sometimes folks talk about day by day, but I tell people all the time, moment by moment, because it really is that. It can change in the blink of an eye and the snap of a finger. your feelings, what is happening for you internally. And so when I think about how it looks for the journey of it, I encourage folks to not avoid it, not do too much of the detachment. Distraction is okay because we don't want to live in that forever and ever and ever because it can be very heavy and it's not productive for a lot of us. But feel the feelings and try not to get stuck in it. When I think about also the caregiving piece of that, right? So I was not a caregiver for my mom. My siblings and I, we kind of checked in and we made sure that she had what she needed, that sort of thing. But my aunt really did a really great job of caring for my mom. But my grandmother, I definitely was her primary caregiver for a lot of time before she went into a facility. And I think when she passed, it was complicated for me because I did feel some relief. And I felt like I couldn't say that out loud. I felt like I couldn't. I think as caregivers, we are, expected to have this sort of perpetual state of caring and we don't get tired and we're doing such a service to the person that we love, and so we can't be upset and we can't feel stressed and we get like there's no space for that sometimes. And so for me it was complicated. Of course I miss my grandma. I dream about her every night. She's always in my dreams. I just dreamt about her a couple nights ago and it was a very interesting dream too. And so she's always with me. My mom is also always with me, but I think for me the relief was surprising because I spent a lot of time, they took up a lot of time in my brain, worrying about them, caring about them, hoping they were okay, hoping that the facility was doing what they need to do, hoping that the doctors were listening, hoping that, on the phone with this, being a power of attorney, all these things. And so as much as I suffered because of the loss, there was a piece of relief there. Like they're at peace. I also regained some of my peace. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Caregiving, hardest thing I've ever done. Like 24/7, worrying, thinking, hoping that things are going the way they need to go, being the person that everyone calls. It's a lot. And I think that sometimes it can be really complicated to feel relieved when the person passes away. That can be in there, right? In the complicatedness of it all, right? The sadness, the loss, the grief, the pain. There also can be relief because the person is at peace, ideally. And also you get some of your life back. Like just keeping it 100. You get some of your life back. Unless you're going into another caregiving situation. But for me, I was like, okay, like I could breathe. I can breathe. And so I also struggled with like, okay, now I'm not, that isn't taking up so much of my brain. So like, now what do I do? What's next? This isn't a part of my identity anymore. So then what do I do? How do I find new meaning with my life? I'm used to being my grandma's caregiver, her go-to. I'm the person she called when something going on. I'll be like, why didn't you call so and so? I don't want to bother them, but you called me. Like that was our relationship. Anyway, so I think for me, once they passed, it was really hard for me to be motivated in business. It was hard for me to be, because they're the people I did it for. They were the people that I wanted to see and be proud of me. And that was really hard. And so I think acceptance that I'll never be the same was really important for me. I think I was really I was struggling with attempting to be the person I was before they passed. And that's impossible. It's impossible. You will never be that person because you were that person because they were here and they're not coming back, right? That realization, the acceptance that I'll never be the same was really, really helpful. And through my work, right? It's okay to not be a cemetery person. I'm not a person that goes to those sorts of things. And that's okay. Like your grief is yours to have. And also that grief looks different day to day. It looks different moment by moment. It looks different whether it's been a year, 2 years, 5, 10, 15, whatever that looks like, it looks different. And to be able to kind of ride the wave as it looks. And so I'll leave with or end with the fact that it's been a journey. I'm honored that they were able to be a part of my lives. I'm honored. I know that I can have happiness without them physically being here. I've been able to accept that. I accept that I'm a different person, that grief forever changes you. And so I encourage the folks who are grieving to give yourself grace through the process. I encourage you to remember that grief is infinite. There is no end date for it. And so how you integrate it into your everyday is helpful. That's really going to get us. And that also that sorrow and healing can coexist. It doesn't have to be one or the other. There is a gray there. You don't have to be in perpetual state of mourning, or you don't have to like say, "Oh, I'm healed," and that's it, right? And so I just encourage all of us as grieving people, as former caregivers, as current caregivers, excuse me, to give ourselves grace as we maneuver through the journey because it is lifelong. And so thank you so much for your time. I appreciate Miss Denise for the platform, for the space. So thank you.
Yeah, and please put your contact
Oh,
information
absolutely.
in our chat room.
Absolutely. Will do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. That was really powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, this idea that forgiveness is part of our experience as we grieve. Forgiveness for what was, forgiveness for what is. Okay, so we're going to close with thinking about what's next. Here we go. Okay, so what is next? So there's wisdom and insights that you've gained that can be helpful as you think about your next steps. Again, this idea that what we gain during caregiving doesn't stay in our caregiving experience. It keeps with us. We carry it through into the next piece of whatever is next for us. So let's think about what that is. I had mentioned at one point earlier that I had joined my mom's church guild so that she could go to the meetings. And in one meeting, it was interesting. So it's a Catholic church guild, and the Catholic Church is very much about recruiting priests. And so we actually had a priest come and talk to us about how he works with young men to determine if they are appropriate for the priesthood. And I thought, what am I going to get out of this presentation? Except what I got out of it was this process. So he shared how he helps young men determine if the next step for them is priesthood. And this process that he shared, I thought, my gosh, this is really helpful for us when we're thinking about our next step. So I borrowed it from him. Just want to give out a shout out to him. And he really focused on 3 areas for us to think about: capacity, completion. He talked about zest in a different way, so I changed it to think through zest. He had a 3-part. I changed the 3rd part that he talked about. I can't remember what it was, to zest. So let's think about capacity. And I like this idea about capacity because it's what's possible today, in this moment, in this week. When we wake up in the morning, our capacity for today might be very different than it was yesterday or last week. And I like that we can actually measure capacity around what's possible right now. Our capacity, for instance, the first few weeks after caregiving ends might be very different than it is 2 years after caregiving ends. And if we think about it from the perspective of our energy, our time, our resources, and our budget, it helps us define our capacity for today. And for those of you who are joining us live, if you have another word that you think should be part of the definition of capacity, please feel free to share that in the chat. I'd love for us to think about what else can we add to energy, time, resources, and budget as we think through our capacity. When you think about what's next, then you think about what's the capacity for me as it relates to what's next. It might be that your capacity is, I can simply get up and take care of my basic needs. That's your capacity. It might be in a period of time that you think, huh, My capacity is beyond my basic needs. I can do that, and I can do a little more. I think about my capacity during caregiving, and honest to goodness, what was possible for me was limited. And what's possible for me now in terms of capacity is more expansive. For instance, I tried to take supplements for vitamin D and calcium when I was caring for my parents, and honest to goodness, I couldn't keep up with it. And now I can. When I was caring for my parents, I really wanted to stretch every morning. And so I did until I couldn't. And honestly, I did probably for a week or two, and then something would happen and disrupt that habit. You know this. During a caregiving experience, it's the disruptions that derail us. And now I don't have disruptions, so I stay on track and I stretch every morning. Our capacity changes and evolves over time. And it's important for us to think through what's possible as it relates to capacity and not judge what's possible, but receive what's possible given every moment. That's capacity. Yes, the disruptions. I know. I think we just get used to the disruptions. I think we have moments of utter frustration about them, and we don't have the perspective around what the disruptions do to us. The disruptions derail us. I saw this actually when I went back to taking supplements. And so now I'm faithful about daily supplements. And I took out bottles that I had of supplements that I started. And I was counting out how many of the supplements I had left. And I stopped midday. I was taking supplements that are 4 per day, and I would take 2 with lunch and 2 with dinner. And when I went and counted, I had stopped midday. So I had 2 left from a day. I got disrupted. I got derailed, and I never went back. I never went back to the supplements until a year after caregiving ends. Yeah, thank you, Kaylin. So waiting for the other shoe to drop, this high alert, that is exhausting. Years ago, I had connected with a former family caregiver who wrote about caring for her husband, and she talked about after caregiving ended, it was such an adjustment for her to sleep through the night. She was so used to keeping one eye open and one ear ready that for a year, it was very difficult for her to relax enough to sleep. That's waiting for another shoe to drop during the night. It's not just during the day, it's during the night too. If we are not yet sleeping, it will impact our capacity. And if you think, oh, just don't have the capacity right now because I'm still tired, acknowledge that you're still tired and then put sleep and rest as your priority. Rather than forcing ourselves to find the energy that does not exist, we can actually do what can give us energy and focus on how do I relax? How do I improve my sleep? Knowing that it's a process, it doesn't happen overnight. So that's capacity. And then completion is the next step. Oh my gosh, I thought this was so helpful to understand. What's the work that still needs to be completed? So closure in a caregiving experience can include the emotions, the relationships, the regrets, the what ifs, the worries. When we are in a period of time after caregiving ends, the focus often is around closure as it relates to the estate. We also have to close out our caregiving experience. And Nadine gave us an exercise earlier with the letter writing that can help us think through how do I close this out? The emotional part of closure related to caregiving can take longer than closing out the estate. I think sometimes the estate closure can take a while. I have thoughts about what happened during caregiving that I didn't have time to think through, and now I do. And the thoughts around what happened impact my relationship today, for instance, with my siblings. There were a couple times when I really felt completely alone and forgotten by them. And I powered through because that's what caregiving required. I showed up for my parents. I took care of things. I took care of them. And now I think, what do I want my relationships to be like? How can I close out my disappointment around what it was like with them? There was one time when I was really, really upset with my younger sibling, and I had friends that would say, "You should tell her." And I said, "I'm not going to. I'm not going to tell her. Because I know that that will forever impact our relationship." I already had one sibling who had, in essence, estranged herself from the family. I had another sibling that had died. There were a few of us left. That's how I felt. And I thought, if I say something, there's going to be fewer of us left. So I had decided to just cry about it, get support from my friends about it, and then move forward. And it's showing up for me now in a way that I think, I guess I just put it in a box. Now the box is open again. So what needs to be completed about that? What's my work that needs to be completed? And we can look at this as lifelong completion. And I also think it's important for us to acknowledge our progress around the completion. What have we already completed? And we can release pieces over time. And those pieces become the finished puzzle for us. And then the third piece is zest. What excites me? Who do I want to work with? What do I enjoy talking about? Which conversations intrigue me? What's the difference I want to make? And it's important to remember that a difference can be for you and someone else, for you, someone else, and then more. Please don't feel like you have to figure out a difference that helps everyone. I don't know if anybody has figured that out, nor do I think anyone should. It's okay if your difference is just a difference for you. That's good. That's good. If you think about difference then, in terms of categories, you could think about what's the difference I want to make for myself and focus on that first. And then you'll connect to zest around the difference that you make. And then you could think, what's the difference I want to make within a community? It could be your neighborhood or an online community, could be a house of worship. And then maybe think, what's the difference I want to make in the workplace? And again, if the difference is just for you, it's powerful. That is powerful. That is powerful. Zest is also part of the categories that we think about for well-being. Positive psychology has 5 different categories of well-being, and zest is one of them. So I thought it was interesting to add zest into what's next. We might lose or misplace zest during our caregiving experience. And I think it's important for us to remember that we can take it back anytime. One of the themes that really stood out for me today is that because life stopped for someone else, doesn't mean that life stops for us. It means we must continue to be present in our life, because that's how those who have died stay present in life with us. Okay, here's another wheel. So what's next for you? Yes, yeah, thank you, Tina, for that insight in the chat room. So these steps are good for us to evaluate our self-care too. Absolutely. Capacity, completion, zest. I just think that's so helpful for us to remember that those are really good guides for us in our self-care and our life after caregiving ends. What's next for you? And as you think about what's next, embrace your own timeline. Years ago, I was leading a caregiving support group meeting at one of our local hospitals. And one of the attendees actually was there, not because he was still in a caregiving experience, but because caregiving had ended for him and he wanted tips about how to start dating again. I thought it was so interesting that he came to this support group meeting with a very specific plan around dating again. He had really specific questions he asked me. Who pays? How does he manage conversations about caregiving during his dates? And how does he start? I thought it was so fabulous because he was in his mid 70s and his wife had died 7 months earlier. And he said, I've told my children, my adult children, that I want to start dating again. And they've all said, okay, good for you, Dad. He was very clear. So he, in essence, had figured out his capacity has the capacity for love. He's completed what he needed to about his personal caregiving experience. And for him, his zest is being in relationship. And so he went out and told whoever he could that's what he wanted. And I just found that to be absolutely refreshing. And he did not care about the timeline if 7 months was too soon, because it was right for him. He knew what he valued, relationship, and he knew that it was important for him to experience it while he still could. So as you think about what's next for you, and we have this 3-step process, also release the timetable rather than thinking through, yeah, yeah. So Raquel is saying not only is grief super personal, but so is healing, right? So for instance, maybe another spouse needed longer than 7 months, but his name was Tom. Tom needed 7 months and that was it. So we can't judge how quickly someone seems to heal because we don't know how much healing he did during his caregiving experience. We don't know what his conversations were like with his wife. So we can believe that he had the right timeline in his head and in his heart. I think sometimes we also decide that I can't have fun while I'm grieving. And I think that fun is part of our life and part of our grief. All right, feeling guilty for smiling. So when my dad died, I felt like I should be a good host at the funeral reception. So we had a luncheon afterwards, and he was very clear about where we should go. So he lived in a retirement community the last year of his life, and he lived across the street from a restaurant. And he would walk across the street, much to my utter chagrin. He would walk across the street to get a gin martini at the bar. and he would go in the afternoon. And so he became friends with the bartender. And it used to always just like, I would uh, almost be beside myself thinking about him crossing the street back and forth. Anyway, that's not how he died. So, so it was okay. Anyway, because that's where we went, the bartender and the restaurant owner had a really set up a really nice function for us. And so I felt like I was the hostess. I invited people, people came, so I would mingle and chat and catch up on with people and talk to them. And probably about 2 months later, I saw one of my cousins and she said, "Boy, you smiled a lot during your dad's reception." And I said, "Oh my gosh, was that wrong?" And she said, "Oh no, oh no, it was lovely to see." Yeah. So you'll know the right moments to smile. And when you have a moment to smile and laugh, smile and laugh, smile and laugh. Because boy, have we shed a lot of tears. Have we shed a lot of tears? So, right. Yeah. Raquel is just reminding us to be intentional with our joy. Absolutely. And we can think about our peace as it relates to what was and what is. If there are words that stand out to you on the wheel, please feel free to share them in the chat room. So for me, I think it's this idea that, yeah, Corey is sharing, allow yourself to have fun and to appreciate having fun. It's okay. Yes, yes. We have seen the other side. We have lived through the other side, and it's not fun. And it's important we live in fun when it happens. I think of it as a gift that's given to us, and so that's why we receive it and enjoy it. Okay, so this is just a helpful prompt for you to think about what's next. And Trudy is sharing in the chat room advocacy, this idea of sharing the things I learned during caregiving, right? Yeah, I think for many of us, we went through an experience that was really difficult. We want to make it easier for those who are behind us, and advocacy is a way to do that. And advocacy can show up in many different ways. And it could just be that you post once a month on social media a tip that can be helpful. If you're interested in trying to figure out what advocacy looks like, you can take our Certified Caregiving Advocate training program. It's 1 hour. It's 1 hour, but it really is powerful because it helps you with your messaging and what you want to change. Yeah, and so Raquel is reminding us in the chat room, you are more than a caregiver. You deserve happiness, joy, and peace without it being tied to who you take care of and what you did. For instance, I think about this regularly, that we have this idea we have to earn or prove in order to receive. And I think it's just helpful to have it. If it's helpful to think about it this way, you can think, I've already earned it. I have earned this. I don't have to keep working toward it. I have earned it. There are many in the self-development space around small businesses who often talk about how we wait for someone to pick us. It used to be very present during Oprah's show space, where she would do a show and you always were like, oh, I hope Oprah picks me to be a guest. My life will change when I am on Oprah's show. That's all I need, is for Oprah to pick me. And I read a expert who said, pick yourself, pick yourself, pick yourself. Don't wait for someone else to see you as this amazing individual. Pick yourself, pick yourself. And because you pick yourself, then do it. You don't have to wait for someone to see you and pick you and choose you. Choose yourself. Okay, so as we close today, I just wanted to let you know that there are additional resources for you. There's a beginning again after caregiving ends course. It's 6 classes. It's free. We have a flashlight camp. I think about a period of time in my life where it felt like God was shining a flashlight for me to see the path forward in my work. And so that flashlight camp is free as well. It's archived 5 classes. We have a free course that's writing for healing. And then I had mentioned our advocate course. You can enroll in that, and that's free too. And then as a thank you for joining us today, 3 of my books are free today. So that's the link to get them. They're free today and tomorrow, the 26th and 27th. And one of the books is A Guide to Beginning Again. The other one is the Daily Healing Plan. I love the Daily Healing Plan. And the third one is called The Sunday Question. I pose a question every Sunday. I turned it into a book where it's journal prompts around a question that becomes an intention for you for the week. So those books are free on Kindle, the 26th and 27th. And then if you're interested in any of our training programs, you can save with coupon code support. Okay. Thanks everybody for being here today. It was great to connect with all of you. I'm going to stop the recording, but if you are here for CEUs, just wait and I'll put our CEU evaluation form in the chat room. Although, even if you're not here for CEUs, I'd love for you to fill out the evaluation form. Okay, thanks everybody for being here. Keep us posted on how you do. You can join us on Caring Our Way, which is our community where we have all our events and other special initiatives. We'd love to keep in touch with you there. Okay, thanks everyone.